At 7:14 on the morning of September 19th, 1944, Captain James Herbert Leach sat in the turret of his M4A3 Sherman, staring into a wall of grey fog so thick he could not see the tank 10 metres ahead of him. Somewhere in that fog beyond the rolling fields of eastern France near the village of Lezey, German panzers were waiting. 22 years old, 81 days in combat, 0 engagements against massed Panther tanks. The radio crackled with static, then a voice. A reconnaissance patrol had spotted enemy armour assembling in a tree line 1,500 metres to the northeast. The scout's voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man trying not to sound afraid. The report said 15 to 20 tanks, all of them Panthers. Leach's company had 11 Shermans. Standard American doctrine said you needed a 3-to-1 advantage to attack a defended position. Leach was looking at nearly 2-to-1 odds the wrong way. And the Panther was not just any tank, it was the most feared armoured vehicle on the Western Front. The machine that made American tankers wake up sweating in the middle of the night. The Germans had been building Panthers since 1943, specifically designed to counter the Soviet T-34 that had shocked German commanders on the Eastern Front. The Panther weighed 45 tons, nearly 12 tons heavier than the Sherman. Its frontal glacis was 80 millimeters thick, sloped at 55 degrees, giving it an effective protection of roughly 140 millimeters. The Sherman's 75mm gun struggled to penetrate that armour under combat conditions. At typical engagement ranges, successful kills required hitting weak points, catching the Panther at an angle, or getting extremely close. The Panther's gun was the 75mm KWK-42, with a barrel so long it looked almost cartoonish, extending nearly 5 metres from turret face to muzzle. That length gave the shell tremendous velocity, 935 metres per second at the muzzle. Depending on ammunition type and angle of impact, that gun could defeat the Sherman's frontal armour at ranges exceeding 1,500 metres, long before an American crew could reliably return effective fire. In the hedgerow fighting of Normandy, American tankers had learned this lesson in blood. The 3rd Armoured Division had lost over 700 tanks since D-Day. The 4th Armoured Division, Leach's division, had lost 263. Replacement crews arrived from the States with 12 weeks of training and were dead within 12 days. Some lasted only 12 hours. The veterans called them replacement requisitions, not replacement soldiers. Requisitions because they would need to be replaced again soon. The mathematics favoured the Germans heavily. In open terrain with clear sight lines, where the Panther could use its superior gun and optics, American Shermans rarely prevailed in direct engagements. Battalion commanders back at headquarters had called what Leach wanted to do suicidal. When he had radioed his intention to attack the German assembly area, the operations officer wanted to know if Leach had lost his mind. The S3, a major who had never commanded a tank in combat, demanded to speak with Leach's battalion commander. Standard procedure said wait for air support. Standard procedure said call for artillery. Standard procedure said do not engage superior armour with inferior numbers. Standard procedure had been written by men who had never smelled burning tank crews. Leach did not have time for standard procedure. Those Panthers were assembling for a reason. If they finished their preparations and attacked first, they would roll straight through American lines. They would cut the supply route to Nancy. They would trap 2 divisions worth of infantry without fuel or ammunition. The fog that blinded Leach also blinded American fighter bombers sitting useless on airfields 30 kilometers away. No air support was coming, no cavalry, no miracle. But Leach had one advantage, and it was not his tank. It was the fog itself. The Panther's greatest strength was its gun. That long-barreled 75 could kill at ranges exceeding a kilometre, because German gunners could see at those distances through their excellent Zeiss optics. But visibility this morning was less than 100 metres. At 100 metres, the Panther's range advantage vanished entirely. At 100 metres, this became a knife fight. And in a knife fight, what mattered was not the length of your blade. What mattered was speed, aggression, the willingness to close distance while your enemy hesitated. Both tanks had similar powered turret drives, capable of traversing roughly 24 degrees per second. The technical specifications were nearly identical on paper, but specifications did not account for crew training and coordination. The Sherman's loader could put a fresh round in the breech in 4 seconds. A good loader, one who had done it 1,000 times under fire, could do it in 3. German replacement crews rushed through abbreviated training programs as the Wehrmacht hemorrhaged. Experienced tankers on the Eastern Front, often needed 6 to 8 seconds for the same task. They had not yet developed the muscle memory that combat demanded. They had not yet learned to work in the dark by feel, while shells struck the armour around them. The Sherman's engine was the Continental R975, a 9-cylinder radial that put out 400 horsepower and could push the tank to 48 km per hour on good roads. More importantly, that engine was reliable. It started in cold weather. It started in hot weather. It ran for hundreds of hours between overhauls. American mechanics could strip it and rebuild it in the field. The Panther's Maybach engine produced 700 horsepower but broke down constantly. Final drives failed. Transmissions seized. German units reported operational rates of 40 to 60%, meaning nearly half their tanks sat in repair depots at any given time. If Leach could get close enough, if he could find the Panther's flanks where their armour was only 40 to 50 millimeters thick, his 75mm gun could kill them. But he had to get there first. He had to cover 1,500 meters of open ground, and he had to do it through fog so thick he was essentially driving blind toward an enemy he could not see. Leach keyed his radio and gave the order. All Baker elements. This is Baker 6. We are attacking. Acknowledge. One by one the tank commanders responded. Baker 2, acknowledged. Baker 3, acknowledged. 11 voices confirming they understood. 11 crews preparing to follow their captain into the grey. If you want to see how 11 Shermans performed against 19 Panthers in the fog, hit that like button and subscribe. Back to Leach. James Herbert Leach, known to everyone as Jimmy, was born on April 7, 1922 in Beaufort, South Carolina. His father had served as an officer in the First World War, fighting in the trenches of France, and young Jimmy grew up hearing stories of that earlier conflict. Stories of gas attacks and artillery barrages, of mud so deep it swallowed men whole, of the chaos when plans disintegrated the moment the shooting started. His father kept a German Luger pistol in his desk drawer, taken from an officer he had killed in hand-to-hand fighting. He showed it to Jimmy once on his 12th birthday and explained what it meant to take another man's life. It meant carrying something forever. It meant responsibility. It meant you never forgot. His father taught him one lesson above all others. In battle, hesitation kills more men than enemy bullets. The soldier who moves, who acts, who forces the enemy to react, that soldier lives. The soldier who freezes, who waits, who lets the enemy choose the time and place, that soldier dies. Leach attended the Citadel, the military college of South Carolina, where he studied military tactics and leadership. He graduated in 1943 with the war already raging in Europe and the Pacific. He requested armour because tanks seemed like the future of warfare, fast and powerful and decisive. He imagined leading charges across open battlefields, the modern equivalent of cavalry sweeping aside enemy formations. He did not yet know about the Panther. He did not yet know how outclassed American tanks would prove to be against the latest German armour. He arrived in England in early 1944 as a second lieutenant with the 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armoured Division. The 4th was part of General George Patton's Third Army, and Patton had very specific ideas about how tanks should be used. While other generals treated tanks as infantry support weapons, moving them slowly behind advancing foot soldiers, using them as mobile pillboxes to reduce strong points, Patton believed in speed and shock. Tanks should attack. Tanks should exploit breakthroughs. Tanks should move so fast the enemy never had time to establish defensive positions. Patton had studied the German blitzkrieg that crushed France in 1940, and he adapted those tactics for American use. The battalion commander of the 37th was Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, a man who would later become a 4-star general, serve as Army Chief of Staff during Vietnam, and have the M1 Abrams main battle tank named after him. Abrams had the same philosophy as Patton, but with a frontline intensity that inspired ferocious loyalty among his men. He led from the front, his Sherman always the first into contested villages, his radio commands always variations on the same theme: attack, keep attacking, when in doubt, attack harder. Leach watched Abrams in Normandy during the breakout from the hedgerows in late July. He watched the colonel's tank roll through German artillery fire that killed the crews around him. He watched Abrams dismount under fire to direct traffic at a crossroads, pistol in hand, voice calm amid the chaos. That was leadership. Not sending men into danger, but going first and trusting them to follow. By September, Leach commanded Company B. He had led his tanks through the liberation of Paris, across the Marne River, through Verdun where his father had fought a generation earlier. His crew had become a family, 5 men who trusted each other with their lives every single day. His driver could maneuver the 33-ton Sherman like it was a sports car, sensing changes in terrain through the controls, navigating by engine sound when vision failed. His gunner had developed his own method for range estimation, watching how targets moved relative to his gunsight reticle, calculating distance from angular velocity. His loader never slowed down, never fumbled, his hands moving in a blur even when shells struck the armour inches from his head. His bow gunner was quiet and observant, the kind of man who noticed details others missed. They called themselves the Lucky 13 because their tank's bumper number was B13, and they had survived engagements that killed the crews around them. The superstitious believed the number protected them. Leach knew better. They survived because they worked together like a single organism, because each man anticipated what the others needed before anyone spoke. That coordination would be tested in the next hour, all of it. The fog swirled around the Shermans as Company B moved northeast in a wedge formation. Leach rode with his hatch open, his head and shoulders exposed above the turret ring, his eyes straining to pierce the grey murk ahead. Tank commanders who buttoned up inside their vehicles survived artillery barrages, but died in tank battles because they could not see. Vision was survival, even if that vision extended barely 50 meters. The engine rumbled beneath him, vibrating through the steel hull, through his boots, through his bones. Condensation from the fog collected on his map case, beading on the laminated surface. His gloves were stiff with dried grease from the morning maintenance check. The smell surrounded him. Diesel exhaust. Cordite residue from yesterday's firing. The particular metallic tang of 5 men sweating in a steel box, knowing they were driving towards something that wanted to kill them. Leach's mouth was dry. His hands gripped the hatch rim hard enough to leave marks. He counted seconds. At 32 kilometers per hour, they were covering about 9 meters every second. 1,500 meters meant roughly 170 seconds. 3 minutes. 3 minutes of driving blind toward an enemy who might already be aware of them. At 7:31, Leach saw the tree line emerge from the fog. A dark horizontal smear across the grey, maybe 400 meters wide, and beneath the branches, shapes, angular shapes, geometric shapes that did not belong in a French forest. Panthers. He counted quickly, his eyes jumping from silhouette to silhouette. 14, 16, 18, at least 19 panthers sitting in that tree line, their crews still outside their vehicles, still preparing for their own attack. Some were checking tracks, some were loading ammunition through open hatches. One commander was drinking from a canteen, steam rising from whatever warm liquid it contained. Another was urinating against a tree. None of them were looking toward the Americans. The Germans had not expected anyone to come to them. Leach grabbed his radio microphone. All Baker elements, enemy armour, tree line, 1,000 meters, bearing 045. I count 19, repeat 19er, Panthers. We're attacking now. Gunners, load armour piercing, drivers, full speed. We hit them before they are ready. He heard his own voice and was surprised at how calm it sounded. Inside, his heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The Sherman surged forward, engines screaming as drivers pushed throttles to their stops. At 7:32, the first German saw them. A shout went up in the tree line. Panther crews scrambled for their hatches, throwing down canteens and tools, clambering over track guards, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Engines coughed and caught, sending plumes of grey exhaust into the morning air. Turrets began rotating toward the approaching Americans, but slowly, too slowly, the gunners still trying to identify targets through optics fogged with condensation from the cold night. Leach watched the nearest Panther's gun traverse. At 1,000 meters, that gun could kill him. At 800 meters, it almost certainly would. But the German gunner was rushing, and rushing produced errors. 800 meters at 32 kilometers per hour was about 90 seconds. Leach keyed his radio again. Baker 2 and Baker 3 brake left. Baker 4 and Baker 5 brake right. Everyone else follow me straight up the middle. We split their fire, make them choose. The formation fragmented into 3 prongs. 4 tanks braking left, 4 braking right, 3, including Leach, driving straight at the centre of the German position. The Panthers, still rotating their turrets, now had to decide which threat to engage first, Some tracked the left group, some tracked the right, some aimed at Leach's smaller centre element. Divided attention, divided fire. That was the only way to survive this. At 7:34, the first Panther fired. The muzzle flash lit the fog orange. The shell screamed past Leach's turret, close enough that he felt the pressure waves slap his cheek, close enough that he heard the supersonic crack of the round passing through the air where his head had been a fraction of a second earlier. The German gunner had rushed the shot. At 800 metres through fog, even the Panther's excellent optics could not guarantee accuracy against a moving target. Return fire from Baker 6, the tank immediately to Leach's left. The 75mm round struck the ground 10 metres short of the Panther, throwing up a fountain of dirt and grass. Too low, but the shot marked the target for the others. 2 more Shermans fired at the same Panther. One round struck the sloped front plate and ricocheted away in a shower of orange sparks. The other hit the track, blowing links apart, immobilising the tank. A Panther that could not move was a Panther that could not reposition. A Panther that could not reposition could not protect its vulnerable flanks. At 7:35, Leach's Shermans entered the kill zone. 600 metres, 500. The fog thinned slightly here, and for a terrible moment Leach could see the full scope of what he was attacking. 19 Panthers, their long guns tracking, their crews scrambling, their formations spreading to meet the assault from 3 directions. Then the flanking groups hit. Baker 2 and 3 emerged from the fog on the German left flank, already firing. Their angle of approach gave them shots at the Panther's vulnerable side armour, that 40 to 50mm plate that the Sherman's gun could penetrate reliably. The first Panther exploded as a round found its ammunition storage. The blast lifted the turret off the hull and threw it into the air, spinning end over end. A pillar of flame rose 30 metres into the grey sky, bright orange against the fog. A second Panther lurched and stopped as a shell punched through its thinner side armour and killed the driver instantly. A third began to traverse toward the new threat, but was hit twice more before its gun came to bear. Smoke poured from every hatch and vision slit, thick and black and greasy. On the German right, Baker 4 and 5 were doing the same thing. 2 more Panthers burning, a 6th trying to reverse, its commander screaming orders that no one could hear over the engine noise hit in the engine deck. Fire erupted from the rear. The crew bailed out and ran into the fog. Leach's centre group punched straight through the middle of the German position. The next 90 seconds were chaos. Shermans and Panthers manoeuvred within 200 metres of each other, too close for careful aim, too fast for coordinated tactics. Tank commanders screamed orders, guns fired at point-blank range. Steel struck steel with sounds like thunder, like gods hammering anvils. The smell of burning fuel and cooking paint filled the air, acrid and choking, mixing with the fog into something that stung the eyes and caught in the throat. Leach's gunner destroyed 2 Panthers in 40 seconds. The first was traversing its turret toward another Sherman when a round hit just below the turret ring, where the hull met the rotating platform. The tank shuddered. Smoke poured from the commander's hatch. No one emerged. The second Panther was trying to reverse when the gunner caught it in the side of the turret. The round punched through. The ammunition cooked off a second later, the explosion so violent it split the hull along the welded seams. Something was wrong with the German crews. They were not reacting like veterans. Their movements were jerky, uncoordinated, panicked. When Leach's tank roared past one immobilised Panther, he saw the commander standing frozen in his hatch, mouth open, eyes wide, hands gripping the hatch rim but not moving, not giving orders, not doing anything. The man looked like he had never seen combat before. He had not. Leach would learn later that these Panthers belonged to the 113th Panzer Brigade, a unit assembled just weeks earlier from replacement crews who had received abbreviated training. The Wehrmacht was hemorrhaging experienced tankers on the Eastern Front, losing men faster than they could train replacements. These crews had been given their Panthers and sent west with promises that the fighting in France would be easier than Russia. Many had never fired their main guns against an enemy. Many had never manoeuvred under fire. They had been told they would attack American positions at dawn, that they would have numerical superiority, that the fog would cover their approach. No one had told them what to do if the Americans attacked first. No one had prepared them for the chaos of close-range tank combat. At 7:38, the Germans broke. The first Panther reversed out of the tree line and fled east, its commander abandoning any pretense of fighting back. Then another, then 5 more. Within 2 minutes, every surviving German tank was in full retreat, their commanders too panicked to even rotate their turrets and provide covering fire for each other. Leach watched them disappear into the fog, grey shapes dissolving into grey mist. He could have pursued. He could have run them down and destroyed them one by one as they fled. Instead, he keyed his radio. All Baker elements, hold position. Let them run. Report casualties. The battlefield fell silent except for the crackle of burning Panthers and the tick of cooling engines. One by one, his tank commanders reported in. Baker 2, no casualties. Baker 3, no casualties. Baker 4, track damage, still mobile. Baker 5, no casualties. 11 Shermans had attacked 19 Panthers. 11 Shermans remained operational. According to Leach's after-action report, no American tanks were destroyed in this particular engagement, and no crew members were killed or seriously wounded. On the German side, the damage was severe. Multiple Panthers burning in the tree line, flames still climbing into the morning sky. Several more abandoned intact, their crews fled on foot into the French countryside. The survivors were retreating east as fast as their engines would carry them. This was not supposed to happen. Everything conventional wisdom said about tank warfare suggested Shermans should lose to Panthers in a stand-up fight. The official exchange ratios from Normandy had been discouraging, sometimes requiring several Shermans to destroy a single Panther. Reports describe Panthers engaging at long range, using their superior guns and optics to pick off American tanks before they could close the distance. But those reports described a different kind of combat. Open terrain, clear sight lines, Germans choosing the time and place of engagement. That described defence. That described waiting. What Leach understood, what the statistics did not capture, was that exchange ratios depended entirely on circumstances. A Panther with a clear field of fire at long range held enormous advantages. A Panther ambushed at 200 metres by aggressive enemies attacking from 3 directions was vulnerable. The fog was lifting now. Thin September sunlight filtered through the grey, illuminating the destruction in the tree line. Leach climbed down from his turret, his legs stiff from hours of standing in the confined space, and walked toward the nearest burning Panther. The heat pushed him back at 5 metres, a wall of scorching air that dried the moisture from his eyes. The paint on the tank's hull was blackening and peeling. The rubber road wheels had caught fire, sending acrid black smoke into the clearing air. Inside that steel coffin, German soldiers had died in seconds. Young men, probably. Farmers' sons and factory workers who had been drafted into a war they did not start. Handed machines they barely understood, sent against an enemy they had been told would be easy. Boys, really. Some of them had been only 18 or 19, the same age as the replacement crews arriving daily to fill empty American tank seats. Leach walked along the tree line, counting the destroyed Panthers. His men were doing the same, some of them taking photographs with small cameras they had brought from home, others simply staring at the wreckage in silence. The smell of burning was everywhere, mixing with the fog into something that would stay in their nostrils for days. Leach felt no triumph. He felt exhausted. He felt the shakes beginning in his hands, the delayed stress response that every combat soldier knew. He found a tree stump at the edge of the clearing and sat down and lit a cigarette and waited for the shaking to stop. The shaking did not stop. It never really stopped. It just became something you lived with, something you hid from others, something you never talked about. Every man who had seen real combat knew that shaking. Every man dealt with it in his own way. Leach dealt with it by focusing on what came next, on the next mission, the next objective, the next order to give. The Battle of Arracourt was not over. It had barely begun. Over the next 11 days, the 4th Armoured Division fought a running series of engagements against elements of the German 5th Panzer Army. The Germans committed roughly 262 tanks and assault guns to the offensive, including over 100 Panthers and 75 Panzer IVs. The Americans held the sector with fewer tanks, almost all of them Shermans. By any conventional analysis of equipment quality, the Germans should have won. They had more tanks. They had on paper better tanks. They had interior lines and could concentrate forces wherever they chose to attack, but conventional analysis failed to account for factors that did not appear in equipment specifications: training, cohesion, leadership, mechanical reliability, morale. American tank crews had been fighting together for months. They knew each other's habits, strengths, and weaknesses. They had developed the coordination that only comes from surviving combat together. German replacement brigades had been assembled in weeks from strangers who had never trained together, commanded by officers who had never led them. American commanders like Leach and Abrams led from the front and made decisions in seconds. They could see what was happening and react immediately. German commanders often waited for orders from higher headquarters that arrived too late, filtered through layers of bureaucracy, rendered obsolete by the pace of battle. American tanks had radios that worked reliably, allowing real-time coordination between vehicles and units. German tanks frequently lost communication in chaos, individual crews fighting alone without knowing where their comrades were or what they were supposed to do. And when the fog finally cleared on September 20th, the Americans had air superiority. P-47 Thunderbolts appeared over the battlefield hunting for targets. Their bombs and machine guns turned German armoured columns into funeral pyres. For every Panther destroyed by Sherman guns, another was destroyed or disabled by American aircraft. Captain Leach fought in 4 more major engagements over the next week. On September 20th, his company engaged German tanks near Coincourt, catching a panzer column in the open as it tried to reposition. On September 22nd, he led a counterattack that stopped a German penetration at Arracourt, arriving just as German infantry threatened to overrun an American artillery battery. On September 25th, he helped trap a German column trying to retreat through Uvalese. His luck held. The Lucky 13 lived up to its name, 13 major engagements without losing a man. When the Battle of Arracourt ended on September 30th, 1944, the statistics told a story that defied expectations. German losses were severe. Contemporary and post-war sources estimate roughly 200 tanks and assault guns lost, captured, damaged, or abandoned during the fighting. Of the approximately 262 armoured vehicles committed, German units withdrew with far fewer operational tanks than they had started with. Some units reported operational rates below 20% by the time they retreated. American losses, while significant, were considerably lower. Reports vary on exact figures, listing several dozen medium tanks destroyed or damaged, along with tank destroyers and other vehicles. The precise numbers differ between sources, but every analysis agrees on the fundamental conclusion. The exchange ratio favoured the Americans decisively. Multiple German tanks lost for every American tank destroyed. Arracourt shattered the assumption that superior German armour guaranteed victory. It proved that equipment specifications mattered less than crew training, tactical aggression, and the willingness to close with the enemy rather than wait to be attacked. General George Patton visited the 4th Armoured Division after the battle. He stood in front of the assembled tankers, his ivory-handled pistols gleaming at his hips, and spoke in that high-pitched voice that surprised everyone who met him for the first time. "You have done something here that will be studied for years. You took what they said was inferior equipment, and you beat what they said was superior equipment. You did it because you are better soldiers. You did it because Americans attack." The soldiers cheered. Leach stood in the back and said nothing. He was thinking about the German boy he had seen through the fog, the young commander standing frozen in his hatch, who had never seen combat before and would never see anything again. Captain Jimmie Leach continued to fight across France, into Luxembourg, through the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, across the Rhine into Germany itself. He was promoted to Major and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart for wounds received in action. He stayed in the army after the war. He served in Korea. He taught armoured tactics at Fort Knox, passing on the lessons he had learned in the fog outside Lezey. Attack. Keep attacking. Get close enough that the enemy's advantages disappear. Trust your crew. Trust your training. Move faster than your enemy can think. He rose to the rank of Brigadier General before retiring. He wrote about his experiences contributing to the historical record of American armoured operations in World War II. He never sought fame or recognition beyond what his service earned him. His son asked him once about the war, about what it was like to fight in a Sherman against Panthers. Leach was quiet for a long moment. Then he said that combat was not something you talked about lightly. The men who bragged about their kills, who told war stories at parties, often had not seen the worst of it. The men who had seen real combat carried it differently. They wanted to remember their comrades. They did not want to glorify what they had done. Military historian Stephen Zaloga studied the Battle of Arracourt extensively for his work on American armoured operations in the Lorraine campaign. He examined after-action reports filed in the weeks following the battle, pored through unit diaries and casualty lists, and tracked down surviving veterans who could still remember what happened in those September days. He found that the German units at Arracourt had been assembled hastily and sent into battle with inadequate preparation. The 113th Panzer Brigade, which Leach's company had attacked on September 19th, had existed for less than a month before entering combat. Its crews had received perhaps 2 weeks of training on their Panthers, barely enough time to learn the basic controls, nowhere near enough to develop the coordination that tank combat demanded. The veteran Zaloga interviewed consistently praised their commanders, men like Leach, men like Abrams, officers who understood that tank warfare rewarded aggression and punished hesitation, officers who led from the front and trusted their crews to follow them into situations that looked impossible on paper. One veteran told Zaloga that he had served under many officers during the war, but only a few understood what made tankers effective in combat. Leach was one of those few. He never asked his men to do anything he would not do himself. He never gave orders from a safe distance. He was always in the first tank, always the first into danger. That leadership style cost lives among officers, but built unshakable confidence among the men who followed them. The crews of Company B believed they could beat any German force because Jimmie Leach believed it, and Leach had never been wrong. James Herbert Leach, known to everyone as Jimmy, died on December 17, 2009. He was 87 years old. He's buried with military honours, his service to his country recognised by the medals he earned and the men he led. His family gathered to remember a man who rarely spoke of the war, but who had shaped American armoured doctrine through his example. His legacy lives in the historical record. The after-action reports filed in September 1944, typed on manual typewriters in command tents, while artillery rumbled in the distance. The unit histories compiled after the war by historians trying to make sense of what had happened. The statistics gathered by army analysts trying to understand why the Battle of Arracourt produced such unexpected results. The testimony of survivors who remembered a captain who attacked when doctrine said retreat, who closed with the enemy when common sense said wait, who trusted his crew and his instincts when the fog was so thick he could not see 50 metres ahead. Roughly 260 German tanks committed. Roughly 200 lost. American losses significantly lower. Those numbers sit in archives at the National Records Administration in College Park, Maryland, filed in manila folders that have yellowed with age. Most researchers walk past them without stopping. The Battle of Arracourt does not have the fame of D-Day or the Bulge. It does not appear in popular films or best-selling books. It was a 2-week engagement in eastern France that most people have never heard of, a footnote in a war full of larger operations. But for those who understand what happened there, for those who know how the odds appeared to favour the Germans on paper, for those who can read equipment specifications and calculate theoretical outcomes, Arracourt represents something profound. It represents the moment when American tank crews proved that courage and training and aggression could overcome technological disadvantage. It represents the moment when assumptions about German armoured superiority died in a French tree line, killed by men in supposedly inferior tanks who refused to accept that inferior equipment meant inevitable defeat. It represents Captain Jimmie Leach and the men of Company B, who never sought recognition, who never wanted parades or monuments, who went home after the war and raised families and built lives and careers, carrying memories they rarely shared with anyone outside their shrinking circle of fellow veterans. Every year that circle grew smaller. By the 1990s, most of the men who fought at Arracourt were in their 70s and 80s. By 2010, almost none remained. Their stories went with them, told only in fragments to family members who could not fully understand what their fathers and grandfathers had experienced. But some stories survived in the official record. Some were captured by historians who knew to ask the right questions before it was too late. Some were preserved in after-action reports written while the events were still fresh, while the smell of burning tanks still hung in the French air. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favour, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about men who faced difficult odds and found ways through. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Germany, France. Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served in armoured units. Tell us if you have heard of Arracourt before today. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Captain Jimmie Leach and the men of the 37th Tank Battalion are remembered. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.